video, we're going to explore what is meant by a stakeholder. Stakeholders can have a significant impact on a business, both positively and negatively. Being able to build strong relationships with stakeholders in your business is going to be really important if you hope to be successful. So I guess the first thing to cover is, what is a stakeholder? But before we do this, it might help to understand the origins of this important key term. So originally, a stake meant, as it does now, an amount of money or something else of value that is placed on a bet. The word stakeholder came around in the 1700s as a way of describing a person who takes those bets. They are literally the stake holder. They hold the stake. So it doesn't quite mean the same thing in business. We use it in a less literal meaning of the word to describe a person who has a concern or an interest in a certain organisation, business, or even in an outcome. So a stakeholder in your business is any individual, group or party that has an interest in the outcomes of your actions. Common examples of stakeholders include employees, customers, shareholders, suppliers, communities and governments. Different stakeholders have different interests, and it will often be difficult to keep all stakeholders happy all of the time. It is important before we begin to ensure that you do not confuse stakeholders with another key term that I mentioned there, shareholders. They are different things. Kind of. A stakeholder, as I mentioned, is anyone who has an invested interest in a business and its actions. A shareholder, on the other hand, is somebody who owns a piece of the business. So a shareholder is a stakeholder, but a stakeholder is not always a shareholder. So let's just go over that one more time. Stakeholders have an interest in the business. Shareholders own a piece of the business. We will look carefully at all of the different groups of stakeholders and why they are important, but first let's introduce this video's main example. This is Brandon Chase, and he is supervising the construction of a new packaging factory in Birmingham owned by Ace Foods Ltd. Ace Foods deliver reasonable priced, pre-packaged ready meal products to a number of the major supermarkets throughout the UK. They already operate a successful packaging factory just outside of London and have recently received a substantial grant from the government to build this new factory in Birmingham. There are many people who may have an interest in the new Ace Foods factory. They are all known as stakeholders. And these stakeholders can be split into either external, people or groups with an interest but who are not part of the business, they are not, so to speak, in the business, or stakeholders can also be internal, people with an interest who are part of the business. So let's first look at external stakeholders and why they might be interested in Ace Foods and its new factory. The following groups would be considered external stakeholders: the government, suppliers, customers, and the local community. Let's look at each of these generally before considering why they would be interested in Ace Foods Ltd and how they might be able to influence the company. As previously mentioned, the government has provided Ace Foods with a considerable grant towards helping the construction of the new factory. A grant is a sum of money awarded to your business from the government that you don't have to pay back. So why would they do this? Well, if a business is successful, then the government will receive taxes on the money earned to put towards paying for crucial services such as the police, the fire department, refuse collection, and the NHS. Taxes are how the government pays for, well, the country. More importantly, in this particular circumstance, the government is invested in the success of this factory as it is expected to provide nearly 500 jobs in the local area. The factory is being built in a part of Birmingham which has particularly high levels of unemployment. meaning many people are out of work and would therefore likely be claiming benefits. These are payments from the government to allow them to pay for the bare necessities that people need to survive. So if the Ace Foods factory employs 500 new staff, then these people will no longer be claiming money from the government and will also pay a proportion of their income in taxes. So the government doesn't have to pay them, and in most circumstances, they have to pay the government. So these newly employed people will also now be more likely to have disposable income, which they will spend on local goods and local services, meaning that these businesses also pay the government more tax. On the other hand, if the factory was to close after launch and those 500 staff were laid off, meaning they were no longer required, well, this would have the opposite impact, meaning that the local economy may suffer. To all the teachers out there, show all of these videos without any ads and gain access to our growing library of over 500 teaching worksheets. Why not visit BizzWizard.co.uk to find out more? For the government, the perfect situation is that every business is successful and pays lots of tax, and that all of these businesses employ lots of staff, and that those staff are successful and that they pay lots of tax, and therefore the government is receiving more and more tax and paying out less and less benefits. So let's now move on to the next external group of stakeholders, suppliers. A supplier is a business or an individual that supplies your business with the products or services that you need to produce your own products or services. In our example, these businesses provide Ace Foods with all of the new equipment and the resources needed to operate their business, including all of the ingredients for their pre-packaged foods. Suppliers are an extremely important stakeholder group, and a business's ability to keep these stakeholders happy can be pivotal to its success. Building strong relationships with suppliers will mean that they should provide an efficient service with great customer care, and might even reduce their prices as your relationship grows. If the success that Ace Foods have achieved continues, then in turn, the suppliers will also be more successful. Think of it like this. If Ace Foods sales increase, then they're going to need more ingredients to match the customer demand, to make the pre-packaged foods. Ace Foods purchase these ingredients from their suppliers, and therefore the suppliers' sales also increase. More pre-packaged food, more ingredients, more money for Ace Foods, more money for the suppliers. On the other hand, in the event that Ace Foods sales drop, the opposite is true. The suppliers' sales will also drop as Ace Foods do not require the same level of ingredients or equipment. So now let's look at the local community as a stakeholder of Ace Foods. So why does the local community have an invested interest in the success or failure of the Ace Foods factory? Well, as we've already discussed, the factory is going to bring in many new jobs to the local community. Imagine you are a baker in this area of Birmingham running a small bakery. These newly employed people at the factory now have a little more money than they did before, and it turns out that they're going to use some of this disposable income to buy tasty treats from your bakery. You have now made more money as a local entrepreneur because of the Ace Foods factory. Bring this video and over 100 more to life with fun, interactive games, quizzes and case studies. Why not try the first 25 completely free by visiting BizzWizard.co.uk. The local community will not always think positively about business, and some members of this stakeholder group may hope that the factory is not a success. Local residents may be unhappy with the pollution in the area due to the major construction work now taking place. Or imagine you live across the road from the construction site. The level of noise may be keeping your family awake and generally disrupting the peace. There are many other reasons that we could consider that a local community might not wish a business to succeed, but the truth is that keeping this stakeholder group as happy as possible will improve the chances of a business's success. And the final external stakeholder that we're going to consider is potentially the most important of all. It is, of course, the customer. Happy customers can have a huge impact on a business. If they are happy with your product or service, then they will likely spread the word to their friends and family, leading to an increase in sales. Unhappy customers can have just as big, if not even more, impact. If you lose your customers and nobody is paying for your goods and services, well, how can your business survive? Let's look at a quick example. In 2013, another popular pre-packaged food supplier found itself in the spotlight and had some extremely unhappy customers on its hands. We will not name the business involved, but basically they were found to be selling beef lasagna, which actually contained 100% horse meat. As you can imagine, this led to many customers boycotting the brand, which means refusing to purchase goods from the business. Jump forward less than 3 years after the horse meat scandal, and this major brand of lasagna was no longer sold in the UK. You couldn't find it anywhere, and this shows the impact of not keeping this important stakeholder group happy. If customers lose faith in a brand, it can inevitably lead to its failure, as was the case in this particular example. Now that we have carefully considered all of the important groups of external stakeholders, let's look at internal stakeholder groups within a business. Internal stakeholder groups include owners and shareholders, employees, and managers. So first we will consider the owners of the business, probably the easiest to understand. Why are all the owners of the business interested in its success? Well, it's their business, and they certainly wouldn't want to see it fail. When we talk about owners in this context, we mean sole traders running their own business or partners in it together. So the owners need the business to do well so that they are able to earn a living, pay their bills, and expand their enterprise. The failure of their business may mean that they find themselves without an income and struggle to support their families. Remember, sole traders and partners in a partnership all have unlimited liability, meaning if the business fails, any debts owed are their personal responsibility. So as a stakeholder group, the owners would be pretty invested in not losing their personal possessions. Remember, as we have discussed in other videos, a company is owned by its shareholders, and therefore this is an extremely important group of stakeholders. They have an interest in the business, and if the business is doing well, then the value of the share that they own will likely rise. And this means that a shareholder can choose to sell that share, or even multiple shares, for more than they originally paid for them, ultimately making a profit. If the business is successful, then shareholders will also receive a larger dividend. This is the shareholders' annual payment, or you can think of it as their cut of the profits. So this group is likely to be happy if the company has made more profit and if this can then be shared between them. Each of the video courses over at BizzWizard.co.uk also includes an interactive business case study that applies the knowledge learned to a real-world scenario. There are over 1,000 multiple-choice questions, each with detailed feedback, which tests students' understanding of the content. Why not visit BizzWizard.co.uk to find out more? Now, if the opposite is true, and if the company is actually doing badly, then shares may drop in value and dividends may be smaller or even non-existent. As we have discussed in another video, shareholders have the opportunity to make a vote at the AGM, the Annual General Meeting, and if enough of them vote, they may be able to change the direction of the company. So you can see a company like Ace Foods Limited needs to keep this important stakeholder group happy as they are, well, the owners of the company. So next we're going to look at the employees. Employees are another extremely important group of internal stakeholders. The new employees of the Ace Foods factory would be invested in the business's success, because if the company is doing well, they may receive a pay rise or even a promotion. However, if the business is doing badly, they may have to fire a proportion of their staff, meaning that some employees may lose their jobs and end up unemployed. Now, if this particular group of stakeholders are extremely unhappy with the business, then they may choose to strike, which means to refuse to work until things are changed. As you can imagine, this can have a huge impact on a business, meaning less productivity and potentially a decline in sales. As a subgroup of employees, managers are the final internal stakeholder group that we will look at. Often, management teams are judged based on performance, so if a business is performing badly, they may lose their job to make way for a change in leadership. If they do a great job and the business performance is improved by their efforts, then they may be looking at a nice pay rise or an additional bonus. And that brings us nicely back to Brandon, managing the construction of the Ace Foods factory. As a stakeholder himself, he is hoping that the factory will be a massive achievement and that the 500 expected new employees will be able to support the company's ongoing success. So there you have it. That's pretty much what you need to know about stakeholders. They have a stake in the business. They are invested somehow in its success or failure. If you decide to launch your own business, it will be extremely important to identify both your internal and your external stakeholder groups and work on building strong relationships with each of them. This has been the BizzWizard.